Why should you not be diagnosing your patients? Okay. So I've talked about the difference between documentation and securing a referral ad nauseum. So that is not what we want to talk about today. But what I want to talk about today is because I think dietitians do not understand this and they get super frustrated when it comes to getting something documented. I thought maybe doing a video on the consequences, the long-term consequences when we do diagnose when we should not be diagnosing as insurance-based dietitians. So for anybody who doesn't know me, I am Amy Plano and I am the reimbursement dietitian. I help dietitians get credentialed, build the shit out of insurance, and not end up in jail. No, just kidding, just kidding. But I wanted to talk about documentation and why it's so important for us to get an ICD-10 code, a medical ICD-10 code from somebody who can diagnose versus us slapping it on the insurance claim. So first things first, I know it is super frustrating to secure ICD-10 codes. And I know it is not as simple as often sending over a fax and requesting the information. Many times we have to call several times. It can become like we're harassing somebody. But the good thing is when we are getting it from somebody who can diagnose, we are assuming it as fact and we are assuming no long-term responsibility. So what I just want to talk about quick is say you put something like you just select some random ICD-10 code that describes eating disorders, right? As many of you guys know, if you work in eating disorders, there's like a whole slew. What is there like? A dozen different eating disorder codes, if not more, relative to what we are trying to diagnose, okay? If a patient self-reports to you that they have an eating disorder, and you base on the criteria that they put forward and you start using that F code, that eating disorder code, guess what? That code becomes a permanent part of that patient's chart. And the bad news is you may have given them a diagnosis that they didn't even qualify for based on the diagnostic criteria. So as much as dietitians get super frustrated that they cannot diagnose, and as somebody who I think had like 3 semesters of MNT1, MNT2, MNT3, right? Where specifically we studied the Krauss book like it was Bible, right? Like Bible for CKD. But now we cannot diagnose, and we will probably never have the capacity to diagnose. It is frustrating. But the reason being, right, there's a matter of ethics, but the more important reason and the reason why I want to drive home is once you start using this ICD-10 code, innocently or not, intentionally or not, to get a specific type of coverage for that patient, it becomes permanent of that patient's medical record. And say if something happens with the Affordable Care Act, or something happens just with healthcare in general, and pre-existing conditions become a thing for insurance companies establishing premiums. I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're going there, but that is a possibility that we need to keep in mind. Plus, like I said, that patient may not even fit the criteria in terms of how we would diagnose this specific disorder. So the reason why I do not want you to start diagnosing, for lots of different reasons that I've talked about in previous videos, the main one being this becomes part of your patient's medical charts, and it is extremely challenging to get this type of information off of a patient's medical chart. So the nice thing, and I know nobody wants to hear this, is like, I like to thank God that I do not need to diagnose these patients because I am not responsible, right? I just either get documentation in the form of a progress note, documentation in form of a referral, documentation in the form of lab slips from somebody who can diagnose, discharge summaries. Any of those things are fine. But the cool thing is I do not need to diagnose them. Therefore, I have no responsibility regarding what is in their medical record. So I just wanted to do this video because I know I see so many dietitians so angry that we can't diagnose. Well, this girl is a dietitian and she's super psyched that we can't diagnose because that is a pretty big level of responsibility of the long-term consequences of misdiagnosing somebody in terms of their medical record. So hopefully this video was enlightening. Hopefully it showed you another perspective. And if anything, it allowed you to clap for yourself that you do not need to diagnose these things. These are not your responsibility, and it will protect your integrity and the ethics of your practice long term.